All right, this is Dark Days Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by first Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, it's good. Yeah, busy. I've got lots of things going on. But running a few things and hobby stuff. We'll get into that in a little bit. But more importantly, we have got a pretty cool guest for this episode.
That's right, we do. We're joined by Khaldoun Khelil. He's one of the writers on several V5 projects, including the recent Sabbat book, which we'll be digging into a little bit. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on.
Yeah, really excited to have you here. But before we get on to the main topics, talking about Vampire and some of the recent supplements and your other storied RPG career, Chris, why don't you give us a little game update? What kind of gaming have you been doing lately?
I ran a Wrath and Glory stream, which was the Bloody Gate called Bloody Gates, which is a published scenario, and that was a lot of fun with some Astra Militarum. Going up against heretics and so forth outside of a hive city. That was hilarious in places. And I've finally finished painting Cursed City for Warhammer Quest, so I'm playing that a bit more, and it's really satisfying being able to play that as a fully painted game. So that's pretty much my gaming. Mike, what about you? Anything gaming wise for you?
No, absolutely nothing.
Yes,
I've been painting. Yeah, New Year holidays. I've been painting a bunch of Napoleonic Prussian soldiers, so that'll be sweet once they're finally done.
Cool.
So I've gone out the deep end. So
is that all contrast painted as well?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Contrast, actually, the contrast apothecary white from Games Workshop is pretty good. But I'm really excited for the new Army Painter speed paints because they are like 1/3 the price and possibly better and more consistent. So we'll see how those turn out.
There's a lot of products like that now. There's the ones from Scale 75, and I think does Vallejo have its own? I think Vallejo has its own as well. So yeah. It's a trend. They're definitely a tool in the toolkit. But moving on, what have we got gaming news wise? What new interesting releases are there? So next month, mid-March, March 16th, is V5 Second Inquisition. That releases. That'll be the date that it starts shipping, which means that obviously if you pre-ordered it or you order it on the day, that means you mostly get the PDF on the same day, which also means then you can buy it as PDF if you just want, digital and don't want dead wood. Also, currently on its path has got tons of sales for their 10th anniversary with 90% off PDFs, and they're rotating those sales, aren't they, Mike? So one week it's like Changeling, the next week it's like Demon.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're great deals, and I picked up a lot of books to like fill out my my Vampire 20th collection on PDF at least, and it only cost me a couple bucks to do that. So it's a really nice opportunity. And I think also because we have Khaldoun here, we wanted to just highlight Second Inquisition a little bit because I believe Khaldoun, you worked on it. I know you really can't talk about much at the moment, but is there anything you want to kind of just pass along to people to get them excited about the upcoming release?
I was one of the authors on the book, along with Ken Hite and Kat Evans. It was a really interesting book to work on because it allowed me to kind of bring in some of, I don't know if I should call it expertise, but definitely some of my knowledge of defense systems and counterintelligence and the such into a game setting that's modern and has to be used in a interesting and new way, obviously, because you're dealing with vampires and other supernatural creatures. So I think it's gonna bring a lot to a game, whether you use them as kind of an oppressive force that you have to look over your shoulder for, or if it's more of a, I don't want to say Keystone Cops, but if it's more of a kind of a foil for your players, something that kind of nibbles around the edges of your game but doesn't really take over the game. I think there's a lot of room there for both uses, and we give a lot of options for how to use them in your game, and there's plenty of reason why it's, like any mortal institution, there's a lot of reasons why it's not operating at maximum efficiency. Not to give anything away, but just like all things with people in the real world, when they have access to power, especially if it's clandestine power and power they maybe shouldn't have and are using in illegal or forbidden ways, they're gonna use it for their own ends and their own purposes. I mean, sure, they're gonna spend some time killing off vampires and the various creatures of the night, but they're going to also redirect those resources, for their own interests, whether they be personal or national interests.
And I mean, it's going to be an interesting book, I'm sure, because like the Second Inquisition, I use the quotation marks around it, isn't like a singular monolithic organization. It's more of a movement that's made up of various different national or societal organizations. Because I mean, of course, you've got the Society of Leopold and very ancient organizations maybe that who've lurked around in history, constantly fighting vampires. And then you've got obviously I'm sure there are the more modern resurgences of old governmental organizations or so forth as they rediscover vampires exist, and obviously refer to them as hemovores and try to rationalize what are supernatural creatures. So yeah, that should be a lot of fun to use and inject into the game in different ways.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're not monolithic. We detail the various factions, where they come from, what their goals are, what their motivations are, what they think of the other organizations. We even detail the weak points of each individual faction, so that players can, really, if they really want to focus on the Second Inquisition as the core of their game, we give them a lot to work with, not just in how the Second Inquisition can mess you up, but how your coterie can possibly get a little payback, and what's going to work on one faction, is not going to work on another faction, and why that is. And we definitely do our best to make it a three-dimensional complex organization, not the Second Inquisition, as you said, this monolith. Throughout most of the book, we basically call it a conspiracy. It's basically it's a conspiracy. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I also kind of want to just highlight with that this is going to be an antagonist book for Vampire, but it could also serve potentially for an antagonist book for Hunt of the Reckoning whenever that comes out, a new 5th edition that they've announced.
Hunt of the Reckoning, I believe Justin tweeted that I think they've done it's going into layout, and
exciting.
I'm pretty certain it's that far along now. So layouts, and then obviously there'll be proofs of layout before printing. So that's pretty well developed at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I think that just about covers it with the news. And why don't we move on to the main topic, which is Khaldoun.
Oh, okay. I'm up in the spotlight now. All right.
yeah, exactly. So, Khaldoun, why don't we start off with a bit of your gaming history? So maybe like how you started, and then also if you want to share some of your, kind of street cred as an RPG writer, we'd really appreciate that too.
Well, I guess I started with RPGs. I don't know, in the 3rd or 4th grade. Played some, Dungeons and Dragons. I forget what it was. One of the box sets. I forget which one it was at that point that came out. So it was quite a long time ago. But I guess I really didn't get into RPGs in a serious way until I was maybe in middle school, and mostly I played superhero RPGs like Champions, stuff like that. I read a lot of Warhammer 40K books, though I never got to play. I actually had a whole epic miniature. I had a whole epic army of Warhammer 40K. Marines. I had Marines. I had
Epic 2nd edition or 1st?
I don't remember.
Bases,
but boy,
yeah,
it had the square bases. Correct. It had the square bases, and I had a whole Marine epic army, and read all the books. And yeah, I had no one to play with. So so it continues today with my poor dusty Eldar. Yeah, sitting in a closet. But yeah, so then I guess Dungeons and Dragons and Rifts and stuff like that made up most of my RPG diet until Vampire the Masquerade came out in the 90s. And then since then, I've been playing it since the first edition, the softcover book. I was lucky enough to actually have been working in a gaming store. I was, the cashier at a RPG hobby store when it first came in on their shelves as this, softcover book, and I snatched it up right away. And ever since then, I've been playing it. And a lot of live action Vampire as well. I think I've been playing live action Vampire since, I don't know, 1993 was my first live action Vampire game. Yeah, it was run by Ian Lemke and Mike Tinney, actually, in Baltimore.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
To listeners that don't know, Ian Lemke wrote for Changeling the Dreaming. He's one of the original developers for that. And then also Mike Tinney, White Wolf for a little while.
Yeah. They used to run a LARP production company called Night Owl Productions. And we used to play in all their LARPs. We'd go all over the place to play in their LARPs, and Mike and Ian are great guys. So they really they ran great games, and it was pretty exciting to see them actually get onto the other side and help develop and run White Wolf, and some really interesting games for White Wolf. And then I ran a lot of large scale LARPs myself, Vampire LARPs, and I think my first credit on a Vampire book was Cairo by Night. Developed by Justin Achille. I was a project consultant for that because, they needed somebody who knew about Cairo and, Arabic and Muslim culture. Arab and Muslim culture, that kind of thing. So I did my best and I got to, I actually got to write for the book here and there. And as an additional award, the author named one of the True Bruja after me, which, is terrible since I hate that clan, but it is what it is. But and ever since then I've been working on RPG books here and there, mostly as a freelance side gig as I went to school and worked. I worked in the oil business for 15 years and went to school for international security policy and counterintelligence and counterterrorism was my focus, but strictly as an academic and a scholar, not as a practitioner. I've never worked for any government or government agency. Recently I've been able to dedicate more time to writing games, and that's what I hope to do, professionally going forward. So, that's me. As far as recent books that I've written on, I guess I can start with Requiem. I wrote for Belial's Brood, the Mythologies book. And then for V5, I did some rewrites for the Camarilla book and some uncredited consulting for the Banu Hakim in that book. Of course, I've written on the Sabbat book, the upcoming second edition book, and other work to come that I can't talk about yet.
Awesome, yeah, very very exciting. And Khaldoun, I was just doing a little Google search after you mentioned the True Bruja thing, and did you know that your character, I believe, became a card in the
Correct.
Vampire the Eternal Struggle card game too?
That's right. Yes.
Dang! Wow, the legend continues.
So it would seem. Well, I'm named after a very famous historical figure. So
okay, cool.
So as a I don't know if joke is the right word, but as to get my goat, decided to embrace the historical figure who I am named after.
Very cool, very cool. So that's really interesting that you brought up all these other games, particularly with World of Darkness. Did you mention working on any stuff that's outside or beyond World of Darkness or the Chronicles of Darkness game lines?
Yeah, I've written on a few Cthulhu games. The one is out now as a Kickstarter for Green Ronin called Cthulhu Awakens, which is kind of a new spin on Cthulhu. It doesn't really play with the setting too much. It allows you to play in different eras. but it kind of takes a different perspective on the whole madness / insanity angle, and really brings that into more of I guess alienation is the better way to put it. It's like a kind of being able to empathize with an alien perspective alienates you from other humans and mortals, and changes the way you think and interact with reality, and that's kind of the slant the game takes. And I think it's a very interesting angle, both mechanically and philosophically. I wrote on the Dune game, both a little bit on the core book and on the supplement for Arrakis, obviously on the planet Dune, and I think the Storyteller's Companion for that too. I think that's all I've written on recently. Yeah, for other non-WoD titles. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Well, we'll definitely ask you some questions about Dune later. But why don't we talk about Vampire 5th Edition a little bit? Because it's currently being published. There's a lot of excitement around it. Particularly with some of the new books that have been coming out. But when you got started with V5, I believe it was with the rewrites on the Camarilla book that was done a couple years back. And you rewrote portions of the V5 Camarilla book, particularly pertaining to the Gehenna War. So could you kind of just describe some of the changes that you made to that conflict, and what kind of inspired or influenced those changes being done?
Well, I don't know really what influenced or inspired those particular changes being done. It's just the book obviously was brought back in to be edited and changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was an editorial review board, which I was a part of. So they asked several editors, writers, and RPGs to review both the Camry and the Anarch book, and to basically give our thoughts on what needed to be changed here and there. And I spotted some things that I wouldn't call them problematic, but I spotted some things in the Gehenna War section that I thought needed to be changed to reflect certain realities concerning Western perspectives on the Middle East and North Africa. So I was lucky enough to be brought on after that process to not necessarily make my rewrites actually, but to make rewrites in line with the changes that were made in the meta plot concerning the Gehenna War. When V5 was first introduced, the Gehenna War was a very nebulous concept in the core book, and there was this kind of perception, and the Gehenna War section, which is a first-person POV story told by an Archon in the Middle East, kind of enforced that perception that the Gehenna War was strictly concentrated on the Middle East. That basically you could map the Gehenna War, this vampire-on-vampire conflict, perfectly onto the borders of human conflicts. And that wasn't the original intention, but it's very easy to see how the audience, upon reading those books, would perceive it that way.
I mean, that's definitely how I perceived it, reading those sections, and that's what I assumed. It was really focused on, I think, primarily Iraq, but there were a couple side notes about I think the Donbass region of Ukraine also being a site of the Gehenna War. And you're right, it seemed like it really mapped to ongoing human conflicts. So that seems to be the major change that you really made, was that this is now just kind of it's more of the global hot war between elder vampires, typically, that's going on in the backdrop of Vampire 5th Edition. Would you agree with that explanation?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's assumed that it's a conflict being driven by elders, like that. That's all in the shadows, and it's assumed that it's somehow connected to the beckoning. But that's not necessarily the case. It depends how you want to use it in your story. The beckoning is definitely something which, the more light you shed on it, the less interesting it is for players and storytellers. So we have to kind of dance around that concept a lot of times, because we definitely want that to be used by players and storytellers in a way that's going to be best for their game. As far as the Gehenna War, right, we wanted the Gehenna War to be something that wasn't just this far off thing, this, kind of backstory plot element MacGuffin that was happening off stage. We didn't want a Shakespeare play where, major characters were dying off stage for your game, and then we go, whoop, Gehenna War, We wanted it to be something that if you wanted to bring it into your game, you could. So that's kind of where the concept of the hidden corners of the earth came. And it's basically the Gehenna War is happening in the mountains of Peru. It's happening in Iraq, and it's happening, across the street from you in Ohio. Where there are elders or information about elders, then the Gehenna War is happening, and the people prosecuting the Gehenna War, on the ground are young vampires, just like you.
And I think that's really
Yeah.
It's a good change because, as I say, it makes it something you can draw into your game, and I think there's something quite compelling about the idea that like a skirmish that your vampire character may well have heard of in some run-down district of the city is actually part of that ongoing global conflict, and it feels less, how can I say, exploitative in a kind of a narrative way to just go, oh, the Gehenna War is where all the major conflicts are, which don't involve, trouble to Western society in some respect. Like to go where everything's bad particularly in the Middle East or in Africa, that's because of the Sabbat fighting, whatever. It's much more. It just seems a bit more deeper and mysterious to say that it's spread where you don't expect it.
Right. And also, I mean, you can also look at it as the extension of the eternal struggle of the previous editions, except now, these Methuselahs and possibly antediluvians actually are rising and could have a lot more direct influence. And, obviously, the reason why we're asking about this because it ties in so well with the Sabbat V5 book, which really solidifies, I think, a lot of the not rewrites, but the enhanced explanation of what exactly is going on and what people should expect out of Vampire 5th Edition. So I really like it for those reasons. I think that it's a pretty nice change, and again, really does play into well with previous editions that we've had.
Mike, it leads us on to then talk about the Sabbat book in V5 because I would say that obviously they're in the process of getting from the Camarilla book and its rewrite to where we are now with with the Sabbat book, what with the changes of White Wolf existing as an independent arm of Paradox and being in the house, and etc., which we're not going to dwell on all the ins and outs of all that. But I find on initial reading the Sabbat book, while it is a antagonist book, it is written. I find the way it is written is in a more, how can I say, like there's definitely in-setting artifacts within that book, but it's definitely more guidance on how to use them than, say, the Camarilla and Anarch books, which, while those are player-facing books too, I don't find them as helpful to go, well, how do I use the Camarilla or Anarch as antagonists or part of your story? It's the Sabbat book, I feel, is a step change in presentation of the material.
I would agree with that. I mean, I wasn't privy to the the development cycle, the original development cycle of either the Camarilla or the Anarch book. So I can't say how they were developed, but I can definitely say in having read those books that the tone and presentation of the Sabbat book is much different.
And I think, Mike, that mostly goes back to what we always, when we go all the way back towards Arms Berlin, where the initial idea of V5 would be this small setting book, and there would be rules that would bolt on with it, or whichever rules you wanted. And I think the idea that, I guess, the Camarilla book and the Anarch book were, again, these initially, I guess, conceived as setting books, as pure material that could be used in a LARP as well as at the tabletop. And I feel the Sabbat book definitely shows the change of presentation of V5 to being more tabletop facing. But even then, I would say the Sabbat book is still very good for LARP, because again, you give we'll get more into this, but there's so much structure in there about packs and narratives that I think that allows you to, if you are doing a LARP, you want to play Sabbat, then I think it gives you that guidance for it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all the different the paths have their own, little ethics sections and guidelines, which are definitely usable for LARP, and are a nice update from older editions, which haven't really seen um, any development really since, I guess, 1998.
Yeah.
Vampire Revised came
Yeah.
out. Maybe Player's Guide or Storyteller's Handbook to the Sabbat, which was what, like 2001. So it's been a hot minute since they've had an update, and I think that's all really good. Definitely usable for LARP. I'd say that I mean, just kind of looking through this, and I don't know, Khaldoun, if you have any other insight, but whereas Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, the Anarch and Camarilla books, had very, very experimental layouts, the Sabbat book's very straightforward. It's pretty much 2 columns everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's very, very, very easy to read. And I think, that just in general, just the usability of it, whether it be the layout or how it was written, I think is it's dead on for ease of players and ease of storytellers. So yeah, I think it's good. I mean, we were kind of talking before, but there's all these just little nuggets in there I thought were great and extremely useful. And harkening back to V5 Camarilla and the kind of updates that got, I think there's some really good hints that things have changed. For example, there was a sentence just saying that the understanding of many Camarilla and Anarch vampires that the Gehenna War takes place solely in like the Middle East or Mesopotamia is untrue, and then goes on to kind of explain the more broad format that it takes place in now. And I thought that was a really good way to kind of make the world seem more real, for the World of Darkness, but also just kind of update people that might have only seen the original copies of Camarilla or Anarchs, or only read the V5 book and never went any further than that. So there's a lot of just great, good and easy ways that the setting has been updated in this book that I think are useful for everybody. So I definitely really enjoy it.
I think the question for Khaldoun is like, when you were brought on to writing the Sabbat for V5, what was the mission goal of how you present the Sabbat for this new edition? And given that you're writing purely an antagonist book.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, so right, the baseline assumption when we took on the book, or when it was presented to me, I should say, because I'm just a writer on the book. I'm not a developer or anything along those lines. So the box, the framework of the book was decided and presented to me, and I took on the work. I was very excited for it. It was definitely the book I'd always wanted to write since I started writing for Vampire was Sabbat. So the fact that it was strictly antagonist and not a player's guide and wouldn't have any player's rules. I didn't write any player facing rules for it. We didn't. Those weren't, as some people think, maybe those were like stripped out at some point. It's like they just weren't written because we knew from the get go that this stuff was not intended for player use, except for a couple of disciplines we put in there, and those disciplines are very Sabbat oriented, obviously, in the V5 Sabbat book. So, I mean, the main thing was, how do we differentiate this group from the other vampires that a young vampire might encounter on a night-to-night basis? Like, how do you know, like, in your gut, how does why are the back of your hair standing up on your neck, that in your gut this is the Sabbat you're encountering? Like, that's the kind of stuff we wanted to write in. So I wrote a lot of the rete and some of the path stuff. So a lot of what the things I wrote about was how a non-Sabbat vampire encounters something like the Vaudry, how a non-Sabbat vampire encounters something like the Blood Feast. When you encounter, Cathari vampires, what does that mean for your coterie? What does that mean for your city? What kind of stories are you gonna tell if you have Cathari or Path of Cain, antagonists? Like, what are the things that they do that put their fingerprint as the enemy of the story? Because we didn't want this undifferentiated Sabbat horde. Like we definitely wanted them to feel inhuman, but we didn't want them to feel, I guess, like just some mob you encounter in an MMO. We definitely wanted them to be poignant and to have different flavors, so that you could encounter the Sabbat multiple times as player characters, and each time would be very different.
And in reading through it, and I don't know, Mike, whether you got this feeling as well, like the main focus, and it was really enjoyable to read the way the main focus is on the paths and how that works in mechanically, so that you've got a representation of, again, more feedback on why the Sabbat think and act so differently. And it really reminded me a lot about it actually reminded me a lot about Requiem, to be perfectly honest, because the idea that the Sabbat, as it's presented, they see clan as this curse from the antediluvians, and they're trying to throw off the shackles of clan and be more philosophically minded. And it just, that resonated a lot when I thought about how we have weirdly in Requiem we have so many covenants, and clan seems to if you focus upon that and the differences, clan falls into the background more. And also when we compare to that as well, I really like, and I was expecting it anyway, that the rite and rituals and ceremonies are the way that the Sabbat deal with stains and their morality, which again we're going to put in quotation marks, because their morality is more how do they pretend to be human rather than how do they maintain their humanity, because that's basically been stripped away. And again, that seems to reflect going back to Requiem, because Requiem we have the idea that of again trying to mimic being a human, and also that touchstones in Requiem don't just have to be people, they can be places, things, and ideals. So I actually saw quite a lot of similarity there, which is not a bad thing, because again we've seen things ported over. I don't know whether you thought those same things, Khaldoun, when this book was being developed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the main reasons I was asked to write on this book, other than everybody knows I love the Sabbat, is I had written for Belial's Brood, which until V5 Sabbat was kind of seen as the darkest of the Requiem line, or official vampire up to that point. So certainly, like, some of the lessons I learned there, and in that book particularly, we kind of we delve deep into a lot of different esoteric thought when we were writing Belial's Brood. So that kind of informed the way we wrote them. I mean, obviously, we didn't port over any people's real religious or spiritual beliefs, but we definitely examined a lot of esoteric thought, at least Western esoteric thought, to kind of see how that kind of cult, this spiritual cult devoted to vampirism itself, would work. So that definitely informed my thinking when writing on the V5 Sabbat book and on my own Sabbat book, as you were saying, for the Vault, how stains and how you could interpret humanity for Sabbat. But I can talk about that later. But for the V5 Sabbat, definitely Requiem, informed a lot of my thinking and a lot of my writing going forward on Vampire ever since. I think there's a lot of great stuff in Requiem that we see in the bones now of V5. I mean, blood potency itself, a core V5 mechanic, is a direct port from Requiem. Such a great idea. And I would say that the way V5 handles blood potency and the way it interacts with generation is actually, I think is a marvelous blending. I actually prefer it to the way blood potency works in Requiem.
Yep, agreed. Definitely agreed.
Oh, yeah.
Khaldoun, because you worked on you said you worked on some of the paths here. I'm just curious how much you referred back to previous editions, or was there kind of an impetus to kind of build things anew in a lot of ways?
For me, I think we always kind of fall in love with, well, you always kind of romanticize your first love, I guess is the best way to put it. So there's always that like first RPG or that first book that, captures your imagination, and you never really can shake that. And it's very difficult for other work to measure up to that. I'm sure we all have either an RPG or a book that falls into that category. And so when you see other people's interpretations, it's never quite right. And whether that's because you encountered that work when you were young, or because in my case, it was actually just, really good, then, that's that. So for me, the second edition, the Player's Guide to the Sabbat by Stephen Brown was really kind of what I consider the best of the Sabbat books written. As compared to even his own books, I think that was really where he did his best work. So for me, that's really what I consider my touchstone when I'm working on Sabbat stuff, whether official or unofficial. So obviously, I don't ignore the other Sabbat stuff, but when it comes to thematic elements and the feel, I really try to evoke the feel of that book, and that's what I really want to refer to. Though obviously I'll incorporate, the canon from, Revised and Dark Ages and so on.
Cool. Awesome. That sounds really great. Yeah, I broke out, as I was reading V5 Sabbat, I broke out first edition Vampire just to see if the description of the Sabbat, which is only like 4 paragraphs in the core book, how it would, if it was still valid with V5 Sabbat. And it was, the basic bones are still there. So I thought that was pretty exciting to see.
So, carry on then. So, I guess the question then is, in what ways do you feel for V5 and the modern metaplot, what are the most kind of like interesting ways that the Sabbat have evolved? Because clearly, the type of war they're waging has changed as Gehenna is, I guess, real and on everyone's doorstep.
That's a really good point. I think I've talked about this before here and there, but for me, I really feel on a meta game level, I feel the Sabbat in a sense has won, praise Cain, in that never before has so much of the core Sabbat gameplay and ideology and lore been so front and center in Vampire the Masquerade as a whole. It used to be in older editions of Vampire the Masquerade that if you wanted that vampire spirituality gameplay, where if you wanted that, Nodist praise Cain gameplay, you could only get that in Sabbat. You could not get a congregation of vampires together to have kind of an evangelical sermon of Cain in a Camarilla or Anarch game. Now you can. That has become part of the gameplay. If you wanted to go fight the antediluvians, if you saw the true enemy was your ancestors coming to eat you, that was locked behind the door of the Sabbat. That's no longer the case. Now we have the Gehenna War as a main core component of V5. If that's the kind of game your table wants to play, where you go fight the Gehenna War, whether for or against the antediluvians, or for or against the elders, or for or against the Sabbat, you can now do that. While before, that just wasn't the case. You were locked in, you're not necessarily locked in your city, but you were in your city, and maybe the Sabbat came to town and you'd fight them, or maybe you'd seek out the Sabbat, but, the antediluvians, all that was all, that wasn't really discussed or talked about. Now it's at the heart of the game. And then, of course, the beckoning, however, you wish to portray that in your game. I think we give a lot of options, and if you read between the lines of a lot of the various books, I think the beckoning can be interpreted in a lot of very interesting ways for tables. But you can use the beckoning to get your characters just about anywhere, or to bring very interesting characters to you for no other reason that they were beckoned there. And what the beckoning means and what it foretells is yet again something that the Sabbat have always warned about the elders having control of their young ones. I mean, that's what I guess the beckoning, that seems to be the main theory about what the beckoning is that it's some kind of calling of the blood. And yet again, that's a very Sabbat theory. So for me, I feel that a lot of the what used to be core locked behind the door Sabbat gameplay is now available to everyone, regardless of clan or sect. And I think that's great. But it also meant that the V5 presentation of the Sabbat had to change dramatically as well. And I think that was kind of one of the core concepts of the book, is that it was no longer the place where that exclusive gameplay occurred. It is now, it is now a very different space, the Sabbat space.
And I guess that leads in quite well to, if the Sabbat space of the game has to be different, because obviously, as you say, the ecclesiastical kind of horror is available because you can play Anarchs or Camarilla, who are members of the Church of Cain, or other cults like King Cults of the Blood Gods. There's lots of different heretical cults in there, which makes Masquerade a lot more fun and mysterious. I find that with those available and the Sabbat, we've got quite a fun games that can be played. So that really just leads into being able to play the Sabbat in the Storyteller Vault book, which you worked upon with your co-writers and put out. So I guess how does that Storyteller Vault book enable us to experience how the Sabbat are a different game space to the others, now that certain things are unlocked and available? What makes that experience even more Sabbat? How can it be more Sabbat than it was before? Which is a funny thing to say, but yeah.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, when it boils down to it, is when we wrote the Storyteller's Vault book, The Black Hand Playing the Sabbat, and my co-authors are Rachel Lee Judd and Saskia Liddick, and of course Mark Kelly did incredible cover art for it. When we wrote that book, obviously I had written the V5 Sabbat book. I didn't even know that V5 was going to be available on the Storyteller's Vault until a few days before it occurred. So for me, it was like, well, we've got to make a playable Sabbat book. Obviously, it's going to be really, maybe not necessary, but we just felt we had to. So in about 4 months, we put together the book and put it out, and it was it was a tough slog, but we did it. But to answer your question, the main thing is that since we couldn't just rely on the traditional Sabbat stories, you can still tell the traditional Sabbat story. It's just that now that's not just a Sabbat story. Now, if you want to fight the antediluvians, that's other people do that too. If you want to participate in the Gehenna War, other people do that too. If you want to have a sermon of Cain with a bunch of people, other people do that too now, not just the Sabbat. So for the Sabbat, we focused on these kind of transhumanist stories that's basically going beyond your humanity, which has always been something the Sabbat in the past has always seemed to do better than the other versions, the other playable styles or flavors of Vampire, because they reject their capital H humanity. They are interested in being vampires. They're not clinging to their humanity. They do not think of themselves as dead humans or cursed humans. Like they are vampires, and what that means to live fully as a vampire and fully experience this supernatural life and supernatural world. So the Sabbat unlife is a very mystical unlife. It's interested in omens and dreams and experiencing supernatural things. And it's not interested in clinging to the human side of things. Like they want to speak to ghosts. They want to hunt lupines. They want to find the ghost bricks of Enoch. These are the things that interest them. They're in some senses delving into their past, but they're also trying to make a vampire future. Like they have a goal in which the earth is ruled by vampires, as utopian vampire society. Once the antediluvians are dead, and that is a special kind of thinking.
Mike, from that description, again, to me, it sounds like you can play some with the Sabbat. You could basically play some of the really darkest aspects of, again, going back to of some of the Covenants of Requiem, like the way you describe the really the connection to the supernatural and really acknowledging you are a supernatural entity. Feels very Circle of the Crone. It feels very maybe philosophically. There's aspects of Ordo Dracal. There's definitely aspects of Lancashire Sanctum, because obviously with a Abrahamic mythology there. That's my initial gut feeling. Is like, okay, that's how I would begin, how I would approach it, and then obviously the idea of vampires ruling the world. That's like almost, again, potentially one of the darkest aspects you can play of the Carthians in Requiem. Everyone thinks, oh, the Carthians are the good guys, aren't they? They're friendly, non-capitalist, communist vampires. It's like, no, they can go some really horrible directions. And I feel like the Sabbat has aspects of all those things, but packages them in something that is recognizably Masquerade. But I definitely recognize these aspects in other interpretations of vampire.
Sure. But I mean, I can see the just the alien aspect that Khaldoun you were just mentioning before, and also the transhuman stories that you can tell. That's very divergent from, say, Revised, but definitely is, I think, a good evolution from the way things were in second edition. Not just with the Stephen C. Brown player's guide that you mentioned, but also even Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, which is one of my favorite books. And yeah, I think that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. So, we talked about kind of the gameplay concept, Khaldoun, that you were going for with your Storyteller's Vault book. But what else did you include, which might be kind of interesting for people? Do you have any new lore sheets or new powers or anything like that?
Yes. So, in the book, there are 20 new discipline powers, which are all, very Sabbat oriented. There's a potence power, which basically lets you, Kool-Aid Man through a wall or knock over trucks as you, kind of juggernaut down a street. There are other powers that deal with stealing people's dreams. There's even one power that lets you basically form someone's nightmare out of blood and turn it into this creature that you can control. That's actually an amalgam that's not specific, but it's an amalgam based upon the Ravnos clan disciplines. And so we really wanted to play with that, what would vampire powers look like if you didn't care about, humanity or the Masquerade or any of that stuff? If all you cared about is, being a vampire, and you had this connection to this, cult, in a sense, this mystical cult. And so that was kind of the way we went about it. And so there are 20 new discipline powers, and as of the Valentine's Day update, we added 2 lore sheets because of Valentine's Day. And when we put the book on sale, there's 20 lore sheets. And the lore sheets, we introduce a new kind of lore sheet called a Seraphim lore sheet, which is basically as a pack, you can buy an additional lore sheet that affects the whole pack, and you can only have one. So it's a pack lore sheet, and the Seraphim lore sheet is basically a infamous vampire of the Sabbat who has gathered a cult of personality around them, and you either follow this vampire or hate them. Your pack has some connection to them, and therefore you can buy levels from the lore sheet. And there are 1 or 2 classic characters from the Sabbat from Revised and second edition in there in those lore sheets. We also included a Sasha Vikos lore sheet. Though that actually isn't a Seraphim lore sheet. Anybody can take that, even Camarilla and Anarch vampires. They can take levels from that lore sheet. And we added new predator types, which were very Sabbat specific. I think there are 8 new predator types. I have to check exactly. It's 6 or 8 new predator types, which are very brutal. Yeah, like Sabbat usually... Sorry?
Oh, I was just I'm very interested that there's new predator types because that's actually something I've kind of struggled to brainstorm new ones for. So that's definitely a huge benefit.
Well, right. I mean, but most of the predator types in the main book and elsewhere, they're very expansive. I would agree with that, and they're kind of made so that you can tweak them the way you want. But with the Sabbat, we felt that okay, they mostly hunt in packs, but when they hunt individually, A, they don't have their pack to lean upon, and B, they're following these inhuman paths. What does that look like when a vampire like that goes to feed? Are they going to be a Sandman? Or maybe they'd be an alley cat, but not all the Sabbat can be alley cats. So we developed basically new predator types that really lean into the brutality, but not just the brutality. Like we have one I think called Masochist, where basically you pretend to be someone weak to lure in human or mortal predators that you then feed upon. You kind of like you kind of pull the Twilight Zone. Do you want to see something scary? And suddenly the mortal monster encounters a real monster. So we tried to make it interesting. And then lastly, of course, we provide mechanics for all the paths and touchstones and all that. But we retain the humanity system and the touchstone system and the stain system because those systems are so good within V5. We couldn't throw them away. We didn't want to just say, okay, now you have a path rating. So now basically we define humanity in a different way. Which is humanity is now, for the Sabbat vampire, your humanity rating is more emblematic of how much of your personal mortal identity you have been able to retain. Yeah. So as your humanity erodes, and with your path, you're kind of insulated from the worst aspects of eroding humanity rating. It's very difficult for a Sabbat vampire on a path to turn into a white, fully wassail. But they lose parts of themselves. And that's strictly role-playing. Of course, an ST could enforce that. A Sabbat vampire who's changed their face a million times with vicissitude, who gets down to humanity too, and they say, well, I revert back to my mortal original face. It would be perfectly reasonable for the ST to say, well, you don't know what that looks like anymore. That's long gone. You lost that memory who knows how long ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And the mortal touchstones. I'm sorry. If you want to ask me a question, I could ramble on forever.
I was going to say, it's like, like I said, like the use of touchstones and the presentation of the paths, I really enjoyed. I was also going to say, like, you've also got all the pack types. So there's more pack types, so more essentially group templates, and again, you give guidance on that, like what particular rite they use, and again, it's all just it makes me kind of want to see. Weirdly enough, when I look at that, I kind of go, I really want to see this approach done for Anox and Camarilla. I really want to see this approach done so we get more of that detail, because it's just such a tool that this Storytelling Vault book combined with the Sabbat book, the Sabbat book, that's the antagonist book, combined together, they're just such a toolbox, which I don't feel we quite got with the Camarilla and Anarch books. I don't, Mike, is that kind of your gut feeling maybe as well?
Yes.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell, yeah. Because it's just because you explore so many different aspects of the way you can play as Sabbat. Like, are you a pack that is actively, hunting down elders, or are you more of a sleeper cell? And are you very much about Cain and the faith in Cain, or are you more kind of, I guess, just enjoying being beyond humanity, and you just enjoy being vampires? I would love to see that kind of that aspect within the Camarilla and Anarchs, particularly because, again, I think it goes back to the whole thing, like the setup of Camarilla cities. Like, you have a prince, and then there's Primogen, and there's all these other roles. That all comes from the first Chicago by Night book, but that then became considered, well, that's what every city's like. And I would love more of a, it'd be great for new players in particular to see more options on how they present the Camarilla and how coteries form. Again, this is why I've constantly said, and why this storyteller book does this really well. Again, like I've said, the coteries book from V5 from Requiem is actually quite useful for V5 to think about how you form your collectives.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Actually, the book I grabbed when I was reading through V5 Sabbat was Nomads, which is another.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one too.
Yeah, it's a weird book, and I know a lot of people didn't really like it that much, but it has a lot of great ideas that would be perfect for a Sabbat V5 Chronicle, especially because you're so on the move in many situations, particularly if there isn't like a Sabbat domain. So yeah, there's some great options out there, a lot of great material that you can make use of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Coteries was actually the first supplement released for Requiem. And that was a very conscious decision by, I guess, Justin Achille at that time. From what I understood about it was a very conscious decision because in older versions of Masquerade, the coteries never really got a mechanic. There was never really any enforcement for how coteries worked and all that, and they really wanted to emphasize that group play with Requiem and incorporate not just that as a play style, but with some mechanics. And Nomads, yes, I remember that book. I actually never owned that book, but it had one of my favorite amalgams in there, which was a Protean nightmare amalgam, where whenever you rested in the earth for the night, the wherever you rested became like spooky and haunted, and people avoided it. Yeah.
I mean, that just goes back to why nightmare's a great discipline. Again, I think, the more I think about like modern, Oblivion, I think Oblivion is a great discipline to port ideas over into from Nightmare. Maybe I might have to stew on that one and think about it. There's just so much in the Storyteller's Vault book, which has got more. Because obviously you take the time to even go into more detail the rituals of the Sabbat, because of course in the one book, in the Sabbat book, you're presenting as in your characters that will witness these things if they stumble upon a Sabbat group performing the Vaudry or other rituals. But you need to get into even more detail if you're going to be like, right, you're now actually enacting these things. So again, there's a lot of support there. It's just a lot of fun. It's just a fun book.
Yeah, no, we had a lot of fun writing it, and we didn't just want the mechanics, we didn't want to just do the rules and then say, see this page on V5 Sabbat. Yeah. So we wanted this book to be standalone in the absolute sense of that word, other than the core book. Basically, if you have the core book and this book, you can play a Sabbat game. I would still recommend the V5 Sabbat book, obviously, because it has a lot of lore and backstory and just what you need to kind of catch yourself up to where the Sabbat is now. We don't spend a lot of time in that in the player's guide. Yeah. We have some fiction and some, the lore sheets you can read in between the lines and get some information. But we do not have a history chapter. We felt the V5 Sabbat book did that great. And we didn't want to repeat ourselves, but in everything else, we wanted it to be at least on the level of the core book. The discipline sections, they have a little blurb that describe how the Sabbat, use these disciplines and how they think about them. And the pack types, obviously, I think there are 12 pack types, and they each talk about that. And, since the Sabbat is mostly nomadic, or I should say not intrinsically, but at a base level, it's assumed that you are nomadic as Sabbat. We had to kind of reimagine how domain works with Sabbat, and we reinterpreted that as arena and provided mechanics and a backstory for that. Because the Sabbat aren't interested if they're not interested in holding territory, then the
No,
way
yeah.
domain works mechanically in the core book doesn't work for them story wise, let alone mechanically. So we had to rework that on some level, and I think it's done pretty well.
Cool. Mike, have we covered everything we want to talk about V5 then?
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. I think we're running a bit short on time. So why don't we talk a little bit about Requiem and then Dune? So, Khaldoun, you worked on several Requiem books. You brought up Blau's Brood, Mythologies. In what ways do you feel like Requiem was different to write for compared to V5?
Yeah, I think worked on Blau's Brood Mythologies, and I worked on a lot of Mummy the Curse books, especially. They seem to really like to bring me on for the really grim, dark stuff. So, for Mummy the Curse,
Yeah,
I
sweet.
worked on the Book of the Deceived, which is basically the playable Bane mummies of Mummy the Curse. Which was probably one of the darkest books I've ever worked on. Actually,
It's
now that I think
pretty
of it.
dark, and it really
It's
is.
really yeah.
It's
You know that book.
I've read it, and it's quite when you get introduced to Mummy the Curse, and you're like, okay, what's going on? And you want to know more about the Deceived, and then when you read that, and it gives you that kind of view on what the actual situation, more of the reality of the situation of the Arisen, and just the whole lore behind it, and what the Arisen have effectively forgotten, or they're prevented from remembering. It makes Mummy it changes your perspective on Mummy the Curse a lot, because you're just like, oh, I don't know who I'm rooting for anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem when you work for elder gods that can control your memories, right? I mean, who knows what they're hiding from you, right? So I would say that not only Requiem but also Mummy the Curse, informs my work in V5 a great deal. I would say not just delving into nihilism and the darker aspects of human nature, but I'd say that Requiem in particular, what it I guess taught me and what I try to bring to other games is things are always more interesting when you bring humans or mortals into the situation. When you can either frame the human or the mortal as the bad guy, or more importantly, if you can frame things in such a way that you can juxtapose them with mortal issues or conditions that we have to deal with in our everyday lives, that always makes for a more interesting story. And I feel that Requiem really wanted to explore vampire from not necessarily a street level, but from a personal level. Like Vampire the Masquerade, especially older editions, became very, political. You could have, whole chronicles without meeting a human other than the ones you fed on. And that wouldn't slow you down one bit. While Requiem really wanted to get away from that and really wanted to bring mortals back into the game in a very powerful way. And I feel it succeeded in a lot of ways, and that's something that I like to bring in. I would say for the Sabbat, in the introduction to our Sabbat book in the Storyteller's Vault, that it ends with the line, if it's the end of the world, what are you waiting for? And I feel that's something that resonates with every person on the earth right now, with climate change and, the end of, not the end, but with the wreckage of capitalism and all that. I mean, who doesn't feel that, we've kind of been abandoned on this earth, and what are we waiting to do? Are we just going to keep doing our day jobs while the planet literally lights on fire? Who can you really blame the Sabbat for being so extreme in the face of hungry gods?
Which bits do you write in Mythologies? I know we've actually talked about this on chat somewhere. I can't remember which bits you worked on that.
I wrote 2 sections for Mythologies. One was called the Blood Gods, which is basically a different origin story for vampires in Requiem, based upon basically vampiric spirits. It's kind of a retelling of some aspects of Lilith stories, or succubus, and it kind of it was meant to reintroduce something of a path of enlightenment mechanic into Requiem, with these advantages that dealt with that basically gave you a break on your chances of humanity lost if you did specific sins.
Right.
But in editing, they watered it down to like this willpower dot thing. So it is what it is. They were very scared of introducing path enlightenments in any way in Requiem, and that again showed in Belial's Brood. Belial's Brood, we have the distinction of having the longest developer's note ever published in a vampire book of any edition. It is literally half a page, I believe, of the developer writing about the book. He starts with the line, "I didn't want to write this book."
Yeah.
It's quite good. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's a ringing endorsement. So
yes, I really enjoyed Belial's Brood. And again, I think just because of all the different type of ways of presenting them and connections with the different cults, it's definitely a book to refer to if you want to kind of do a Requiem for the Dark Ages. So do Dark Ages vampire, but from a Requiem point of view, because you can see how some of these Belial's Brood cults would actually quite happily fit within the monopoly of Christian heresies going on.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's very interesting. Yeah, that would be a very cool game, actually.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think of when I would like to. I think, Mike, we've constantly said that we want to kind of do a Requiem Dark Ages Chronicle at some point, but it's always just a case of time and structuring it.
Yeah. And the other section I wrote for mythologies was basically on torpor. That was actually cut.
Right.
So I won't go into that, but it basically took some ideas of Mummy the Resurrection and ported it to Vampire the Requiem, which had these really ridiculous torpor times, and it was really impossible to get out of torpor in Requiem once you hit certain blood potencies.
Yeah.
At least in the first edition. So it was basically a way to continue to play with your coterie while you were in torpor. So it was. I thought it was a pretty interesting section, but it was cut because I guess it kind of introduced a new style of gameplay that they didn't really want to, present.
Interesting. Well, it sounds neat to me. So
Yeah.
I wish we could have seen it. But anyway, let's move on to talking about Dune a little bit, because that was a recent release that made a big splash. And I heard an episode that you're on of Full Metal RPG where you're talking about Dune. You guys had some very spirited debates about the original novel and also the RPG that came out. So we were curious what sections you wrote for Dune Adventures in the Imperium.
For the core Dune book, I wrote mostly on the storyteller section. I was actually brought in kind of late to that book. I think another author dropped out or something. I'm not quite sure, but I remember that I had a very limited time to write, and I had a very kind of concise chapter, and I could basically read almost everyone else's drafts. So I felt so mine was probably the most well integrated for rough draft that was turned in. But definitely, the last one to hear about writing on the book. But no, I really enjoyed writing on it, and mostly I wrote the storyteller section to basically talk about not really the sensitivity issues. I do touch upon that, and there are other parts of the book that touch upon that about portraying other cultures and how not to basically just slap Arab or Muslim paint on your character if you're playing Dune, that kind of thing. But I think a good chunk of my section is basically spent on how to storytell with prescience. Like, how do you tell interesting stories when prophecy is such a not just prophecy, but almost perfect foresight is such a key element of the story, and how you work around that. And I use examples from the novel and stuff like that. I think it's very interesting. It's almost a Schrodinger's cat kind of problem, where if you look too far into the future, then that's your future.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic for just storytelling in general, where you've got powers of foresight. And that leads into, I guess that leads you into the question of like, well, is the future the thing that is going to be, or is it something that's likely to be if you carry down the path that you're on currently? So, if you keep with the idea that time and fate is fluid and not set in stone, it's it's a deep question and certainly one to explore in an RPG, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and Dune is a very interesting one to explore that in because spoilers. But one of the internal tensions in Dune is that the most quote unquote heroic characters are unwilling to walk the golden path, the path that is necessary for the survival of all humankind. They're unwilling to do that, and so kind of stumble along using these abilities for their own ends and interests, which engender other atrocities, and of course will eventually end in human extinction. So it's very interesting. This kind of like, oh, I can't do that, but I can do all these other terrible things, or by not doing that, these other terrible things will happen. Until you finally get a character who, the hero of the story, who is arguably the evilest, most despicable tyrant you could ever conceive of.
I mean, that's a similar thread that we've talked about with regard to heroism in Warhammer 40,000, because again, that's a horrific setting where heroes that we use again in quotation marks are committing terrible atrocities, like allowing doing exterminatus on an entire system's worth of planets just to stop even greater loss of life due to I don't know, an encroaching tyrannid high fleet or something. It's it's that question of are you a hero even if your methods are really despicable. And I guess the question then is how, I mean, Mike, because I've not really played, no, I definitely have not played anything of any of the Modiphius systems, because it's the 2d20 system plus everything else. So I guess the question is how that system works into reinforcing the themes of Dune as an RPG. That would be my question.
Oh, well, I'm not sure if Khaldoun can really answer that too much. I mean, I've heard a little bit about it. It integrates the system, but uses a lot of kind of more abstract aspects of characters to do the roles rather than just like strength, dexterity and the like, which is an interesting way to do it. And I think there's been a lot of debate online about how effective it is for the Dune RPG. But I have heard that there's really exciting rules in it for creating your own house and how to do the different politics of the Dune universe, because that's when the really interesting things that you see a lot in the first novel, but later on the Landsrot and other aspects of that universe are a bit secondary to the spoilers. It's a really old book and old series, but giant worm gods and the like. So I think a lot of people are really interested about it, and 2d20 works pretty well.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. They develop a lot of unique subsystems for Dune specifically to deal with not just the dueling, but also how to develop your own house and politicking and all that. Basically, the stuff that people love about the book, they did their best to develop subsystems specifically for Dune to allow you to role play that stuff.
So yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm gonna need to check out the Dune RPG sometime. There's a couple of books floating around, so I'll pick one up eventually. But it seems really good, and appreciate Khaldoun your insights into some of the more esoteric portions of the Dune mythos. So yeah, it's really cool. So I think we're just about out of time here. So Khaldoun, do you want to kind of give some plugs for Twitter, social media, or any other place people can get in touch with you if they just want to ask you some questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly on Twitter at Khalil on Twitter. You can follow me there, and I'm always happy to talk Vampire and especially Sabbat on Twitter there. And obviously, you can find my work, I guess, in RPG stores and on the Storyteller's Vault. Though I only have one book on there, which is The Black Hand Playing the Sabbat. So that's about all. I play on actual plays every now and then. Because it seems I only get to play role-playing games when I'm on camera, I guess. I don't know why that is. Otherwise, I'm the forever DM. But, whatever it takes. If I got to be on camera to play some RPGs, I'm going to do it.
I think...
So I play RPGs on Vorpal Tale. I play a Belial's Brood game, actually.
You know what would be really interesting, I think, at some point, and this leans into, A, that you're a 40k fan, and B, dealing with, representation of cultures, I guess, in a far future where things have been blended together and etc. etc. I'd be really interested in how you would approach playing Warhammer, playing Wrath of Glory, and what type of character you would play out of the Imperium and how you would portray that. That'd be really interesting. And actually, that kind of discussion anyway, like your thoughts on that. That'd be. I'll have to see about how we can do that at some point.
Sure. Yeah, no, I always love to talk about 40K. I mean, those books. I literally never played 40K for, I say, a decade, and I read all those books. What is it called? Like Legions of Chaos or whatnot?
Realms
I think there were two
Chaos.
of them.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Realms of Chaos. That's what it was. Yeah. Yeah, they were, those were just fantastic books with incredible art. And I would say that my only short line comment on 40K in general is that about half of the enjoyment of that game is wasted on Americans because of our inability to read subtext.
That Gaskell Thrakker's Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. Right. Well, to wrap up then, thank you, Khaldoun, for taking time to go through and explain working on V5, the Sabbat, and your other works. If people want to get in contact with us, they can find us on darkdayesradio@gmail.com. They can find us on Facebook. They can find us on Instagram and Twitter at darkdaysradio. And of course, we have content on YouTube and Twitch. Of course, you can go over to our Discord where you can chat to us and other fans of all these games. Also, as a final plug, because it is the season of Carnival, and by the time this episode goes out, it will still be on sale. You can pick up for Changeling the Lost on the Storyteller's Vault. You can pick up Venice Unmasked. It is, I think I said it, like it's at a third of the regular price, so you can pick up that. And of course, any other Darker Days Radio products on the Storyteller's Vault, which include Ascension Knight and Make Blood Boil, which I think we've now sold 700 of those, so that's great. Because they pay what you want, so that's why it's taken so long for Ascension Knight to hit bronze, because everyone's just downloading it for free, which is what we wanted anyway.
Yes, it is. Khaldoun, thank you so much for being here on the show. Really appreciate all your insight, and to all the listeners out there, take it easy, be safe, and have a good night. This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.